Hey y'all, hope you're doing well today. So in today's message, I want to share some excerpts from the book, The Body Keeps the Score. It's a really incredible book. I've had it for many years and I haven't taken the time to read it cover to cover, but I have flipped through, and I can't wait to share what I've highlighted with you all today. And I've missed being on here. I've gone several days now without posting video, and I'm looking forward to picking it back up, and I just hope that you are finding balance in your life as well. I hope that you are taking the time to be intentional, to purposefully be mindful every day, and just moving forward in that manner, just one foot in front of the other, especially when times are tough, and just embracing the journey, all of its ups and downs. And I totally believe it's true that the old saying that healing is not linear. It's kind of like, it's an uphill climb, right? But it's like you kind of do like this on your way up. So that has proven to be true in my life, and I'm sure you can relate. But just write it out, just write it out, and try to mentally, emotionally not latch on to those emotions when they are really, really tough, right? They're really tough ones, because as we're going to talk about today, emotions are valuable. They are meant to inform us. They are messengers. And so, but just like everything else in our life, they get affected and impacted very, very much when we go through trials and tribulations and just tough experiences, right? But I'm just so impressed with this book. I just encourage you, if you have interest at all in wanting to understand the mechanics of the mind, the psyche, what happens when we go through traumatic experiences. And let me just start by saying this. One of the examples in here, and maybe there's more to this case study, this particular client that's highlighted in here, maybe there's more to the story, but what was shared in the part that I read today was that, let me just sum up and generalize and say this. Sometimes we can be very, very much impacted in a bad way. In other words, we can experience trauma from something that we may not even be able to identify as traumatic, as a traumatic experience. Okay, of course there's the concept of normalizing things, because we don't know any better, especially as children. We may not understand that everybody else's family isn't like ours, and so we can normalize things that other people have never experienced, and we just think it's just part of everybody's everyday life. This can be discovered sometimes for the first time when you go to visit a therapist, and you're 5 minutes into the conversation, just sharing, you're thinking to yourself, I'm not even getting into the big stuff, but you're just sharing a little bit, of your life, and their jaw hits the floor, and you're thinking, what is your jaw hitting the floor for? And I haven't even said anything yet. So, there's, and I just encourage you, if you've never gone to therapy, it's very enlightening, and I just encourage you to be careful and selective with who you choose to place into that position of mentoring you and helping you, along the healing path. But it's certainly very enlightening, a very interesting experience. But yeah, I just wanted to say that one of the case studies that's shared in here is one that's that I was kind of surprised impacted the person as greatly as it did. But again, that's their journey, see? And it was especially important to note that it happened during his childhood, see? And that's another thing. For a lot of us, we may have certain things that happen in our childhood, and we're like, it's not that big of a deal, but maybe it really did help to shape our minds in such a way that we're living as though it was a traumatic experience, even without identifying that. So it's just something to think about, on your journey of self-discovery, right? And healing and all that. So, all right, let's go ahead and dive in. and again, I just hope you're doing good today. So I'm going to start with just a little bit from, what chapter is this? It's going to be chapter 4, called Running for Your Life, the Anatomy of Survival, excuse me. And yes, so it talks about the brain and the different parts of the brain and how they all work together and what they do, and he kind of relates these different parts of the brain to just relatable everyday objects, you know, like he's talking about identifying danger, the cook and the smoke detector, mirroring each other, interpersonal neurobiology, the brain from bottom to top, organized to survive, the rider and the horse. It's just really interesting. But it says on page 64, if you have the paper, that copy, it says, "For now, I want to emphasize that emotion is not opposed to reason. Our emotions assign value to experiences and thus are the foundation of reason. Our self-experience is the product of the balance between our rational and our emotional brains. When these two systems are in balance, we feel like ourselves. However, when our survival is at stake, these systems can function relatively independently." So this kind of goes into that concept of being fragmented, you know, fragmentation, in regards to, you know, psychology, right? Psychological concepts, because it can mean a lot of different things in different areas of study, right? But it's kind of like this splitting off. It's this compartmentalizing type function or action that happens within our psyche when exposed to trauma, which is really interesting. But I loved that he states, first and foremost, that emotion is not opposed to reason, right? And especially that our emotions assign value to experiences and thus are the foundation of reason. So it's kind of like our how do I say this? Sort of like our the part of our brains that assigns the importance, I would say, right, to things. So it goes on to talk about neuroscience and how neuroscience research shows that very few psychological problems are the result of defects in understanding. Most originate in pressures from deeper regions in the brain that drive our perception and attention. When the alarm bell of the emotional brain keeps signaling that you are in danger, no amount of insight will silence it. Yes. So this is kind of like when you're triggered and your heart's, you know, pounding, and you're kind of like you're in the midst of this fight or flight kind of response. You can't think straight, right? And so that's why, again, just having the tools of knowing when to just pull out of a situation, to walk away from a tough situation, and just, you know, take control mindfully with intention and purpose of your breathing. Once again, just to get regulated, learning how to self-regulate, essentially, in whatever different ways work for you, is essential. Learning to self-regulate, and ideally we could do it in the moment, right? That's the ultimate goal. So he goes into a section called Dissociation and Reliving, and we're gonna, the excerpts I'm sharing with you today are going to lead to a message, right? And that's going to be one of hope, and hopefully to give you some ideas for different tactics for healing, right, that you can try. But this particular section is dissociation and reliving. So again, he talks about triggered responses, right, and how they manifest in various ways. It says these reactions are irrational. Let me back up. He gives an example after he says triggered responses manifest in various ways. He says veterans may react to the slightest cue, like hitting a bump in the road or seeing a kid playing in the street, as if they were in a war zone, right? And he gives more examples after that. So then he sums it up and says these reactions are irrational and largely outside people's control. Intense and barely controllable urges and emotions make people feel crazy and makes them feel like they don't belong to the human race. So it's isolating, right? And then I found this really interesting because it's like just a different kind of example as to how being triggered can manifest. He says, feeling numb during birthday parties for your kids or in response to the death of a loved one makes people feel like monsters. It's like some part of you recognizes that, your reaction may not be in alignment with, the status quo, so to speak. So it says, you can feel, like you don't belong to the human race, or even furthermore, like a monster. It says, as a result, shame becomes the dominant emotion, and hiding the truth, the central preoccupation. So there's like this compounding of, you feel ashamed that you don't feel like you're like everyone else. You feel different, right? But it's not your fault, and you don't really know why, but you just feel ashamed of that. And so there's like this compounding process. Now, I don't really understand the part where he says hiding the truth, the central preoccupation, unless it's just denying your feelings, within yourself, because I'm not getting any kind of vibes from this book so far that have anything to do with deception or liars or wolves in sheep's clothing, intentional lying or things like that. I'm not getting those kind of vibes, but so it goes on again to describe the different areas of the brain, which are really interesting. And then he says, visiting the past in therapy should be done while people are, biologically speaking, firmly rooted in the present and feeling as calm, safe, and grounded as possible, right? So being grounded means you can feel, he says explicitly, you can feel your butt in your chair, you can see the light coming through the window, like you're literally in touch with reality, right? So that has to happen first. And I think that in order for that to happen, you have to have your emotions regulated. You have to have those reins. You have to be in control, right? It says being anchored in the present while revisiting the trauma opens the possibility of deeply knowing that the terrible events belong to the past. For that to happen, the brain's watchtower, cook, and timekeeper need to be online. Therapy won't work as long as people keep being pulled back into the past. So there's this to me, this is like describing what dissociation is and why it's a thing, why it even happens. It's like these different parts of the brain. He's describing what they do. He's describing how it kind of messes up your concept of time. And I think we're going to go a little bit more into that. You're just kind of like this wanderer floating in space, and you don't feel like you're part of the human race anymore. You feel alien. You feel you're plagued by shame. There's likely a lot of confusion because you haven't found the keys to understanding yet, which understanding can't happen when your emotions are not regulated. So it's like all these parts. This is the fragmentation process, which creates dissociation. It isolates you, right? So really interesting. And then he talks about depersonalization, being split off from the self. And then after that, the section is called Learning to Live in the Present. So let's read a little bit here. It says, the challenge of trauma treatment is not only dealing with the past, but even more enhancing the quality of day-to-day experience. One reason that traumatic memories become dominant in PTSD is that it's so difficult to feel truly alive right now. When you can't be fully here, you go to the places where you did feel alive, even if those places are filled with horror and misery. I thought that was really interesting. It's like we default back to the places where we weren't fragmented yet, even if they were horrible. So it's like explaining how we get stuck. And of course, I'm skipping over a whole lot. I'm just giving you a little bit in these excerpts. So just, I think this might serve as a great argument for, wanting to do a deep dive into the book if you have interest. And he's talking about emotional outbursts, flashbacks, traumatic stress, and it says desensitization may make you less reactive, but if you cannot feel satisfaction in ordinary everyday things like taking a walk, cooking a meal, or playing with your kids, life will pass you by. So let me share an experience with you all before I continue. I have a little bit more to share. So I've never been a big video game player. I've done it a little bit throughout my life, but I mean like a tiny bit. And so this is something I've picked up recently with my daughter, and it's I love it because I really enjoy watching her and just cheering her on. But well, and in part it's because we haven't figured out how to make our game a 2-player game. But we're working on that. And so yeah, she'll oftentimes pass, you know, the controller off to me and say, hey, you know, Mama, can you get me through this part of the game? And so I've been playing a little bit lately, and it's kind of interesting. It's going to tie into the message as far as what we're about to read next, but it brings you into the present moment. This is a new discovery for me, I guess, because I was just in a different place in my life in the past. You know, it's been, gosh, about 20 years ago the last time I played video games. And so doing it now, at this point in my life, I'm seeing the value in that it brings you in. You have to be so focused on what you're doing that you have no choice but to be present. And so it pulls you just you know, ultra into the moment, and I love it. I love that. And so maybe it's good that we didn't have that second controller yet. You know what I'm saying? That we had to start out with one player, and she's needing help. Otherwise, I don't know that I would have played with her, you know, anyway. But I think that in me helping her along, you know, her passing that off to me, her controller to me, you know, to help her, it's like, you know, as a parent, you're going to have that extra motivation because you're doing it for your kid. You know what I mean? As opposed to doing it for yourself or playing for yourself. That's what I'm trying to get out here. And so, yeah, that's just a really interesting side note, but it is going to tie into the message here. So the next section I want to share with you, some excerpts, is from the chapter called Losing Your Body, Losing Yourself. And this is going to be on page 92. He's got a section called How Do We Know We're Alive? So this is really interesting. Again, it's he's got illustrations of the brain, all the different parts, and he's talking about neuroscience. He's talking about a study where they took 16 people that he quoted as normal, right, to be a part of the study, and they had their brains scanned, right, while thinking about nothing in particular. They weren't supposed to think about anything, and they had their brains scanned. And then they repeated that same experiment with 18 people who had histories of severe chronic childhood abuse. So he says, what is your brain doing when you have nothing in particular on your mind? It turns out that you pay attention to yourself. The default state activates the brain areas that work together to create your sense of self. Really interesting. So the science of self, right? And he's talking about structures within the mind. He says the largest bright region at the back of the brain is the posterior, and I hope I'm saying this right, cingulate, which gives us a physical sense of where we are, our internal GPS. It is strongly connected to the medial prefrontal cortex, or the watchtower. So I'm reminded of, you know, in archetypal psychology, and looking into legends and myths and fairy tales, and how all the different characters are personifications, or one lens, one perspective we can look at this through is that the characters are all personifications of one person's psyche, and the whole story is meant to help us understand our journey, our life's journey, because we've all been through stuff. We've all been hurt. We've all been fragmented to some degree, you know, at some point in our life, just on the walk of life, on this path. And so these stories are there to help guide us, right? And I think that they're layered in meaning too, and they're certainly meant to serve as a lot more than that. It's multifaceted. That's what I believe, and that's my belief as far as truth goes too, is that it's multifaceted. I've got to find that statement. I've lost it. I think I shared it with you all, I don't know, maybe a month or so back, but it's a wonderful statement that basically says, when you find truth, like in one grain of sand, then you found all of the truth. It's kind of like you've discovered, you've hit on this formula or this pattern, and that is proving to be true in my life as I move forward, awake and intentionally seeking, like the Bible says, to ask in the door, or seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open. It's that same concept. And so but yeah, I thought that was cool, because when it calls this particular part of the brain, the medial prefrontal cortex, he calls it the watchtower. I love it, because again, here we have another metaphorical representation of something that normally, you know, that the lay person is just gonna, you know, tune out and zone out when you hear all these textbook type phrases and terms and everything. It's just too sciencey for most of us, you know. It's like, we got enough going on up here. And so just to relate it to something like that, it just reminds me of the characters in these stories, you know, helpers, the guides in the stories, watchers, the main character, and then of course you have that numinous character that's closely either with the main character throughout the whole story, or they meet them at some point, right? So there's always a lot of numinosity wrapped up in these stories, and it's beautiful. But then on the following page we have some images of the brain, and it says the contrast with the scans of the 18 chronic PTSD patients with severe early life trauma was startling. There was almost no activation of any of the self-sensing areas of the brain. The MPFC, right, which is the medial prefrontal cortex, which he calls the watchtower, the anterior cingulate, the parietal, I guess, cortex, and the insula did not light up at all. The only area that showed a slight activation was the posterior cingulate, which is responsible for basic orientation in space. Yes. So the science of dissociation. All right, so he says these patients had learned to shut down the brain areas that transmit the visceral feelings and emotions that accompany and define terror. Okay? Yet in everyday life, those same brain areas are responsible for registering the entire range of emotions and sensations that form the foundation of our self-awareness, our sense of who we are. So there's almost like, I think of it like, what's it called? I can't even think in the moment, of course, because I'm filming my video. I'll drop it here if I can think of it. But it's like your electrical box, your main electrical box in your house. I can't think of what it's called right this moment. But it's almost like there's this main switch, and then you have all these other, you know, specified switches as well. It's kind of like in the psyche's attempt to switch off one or two, right? Which is for self-preservation. It's an instinctive, automatic, unconscious type mechanism in the psyche, but it's kind of like the main switch gets flipped, sort of. And so there's these consequences that we suffer. And of course, what do? We blame ourselves because we don't understand it. And so we just wind up feeling, you know, ashamed. And then if others shame us on top of that, it just all gets compounded. And we wind up just with layers and layers of trauma, right? So, really interesting. And his whole point here is that he says, in an effort to shut off terrifying sensations, they also deadened their capacity to feel fully alive. So incredibly interesting to me. Okay, so yeah, the disappearance of medial prefrontal activation could explain why so many traumatized people lose their sense of purpose and direction. It says, I used to be surprised by how often my patients asked me for advice about the most ordinary things, and then by how rarely they followed it. Now I understood that their relationship with their own inner reality was impaired, right? How could they make decisions or put any plan into action if they couldn't define what they wanted, or, to be more precise, what the sensations in their bodies, the basis of all emotions, were trying to tell them? Remember, emotions inform us. Emotions help us make sense of things, right? So it says, this was incredible. The lack of self-awareness in victims of chronic childhood trauma is sometimes so profound that they cannot recognize themselves in a mirror. So he goes on to talk about the mathematician Archimedes. It says, in teaching about the lever, it says, he is supposed to have said, "Give me a place to stand and I will move the world." Or as the great 20th century body therapist Moshe Feldenkrais put it, "You can't do what you want till you know what you're doing." The implications are clear. To feel present, you have to know where you are and be aware of what is going on with you. If the self-sensing system breaks down, we need to find ways to reactivate it. And then beautifully, I'm jumping way ahead here, in the chapter called, hang on, this is a different section here. It's chapter 17, Putting the Pieces Together, Self-Leadership. And this particular section is called Rescripting Your Life, okay? So he gives solutions, and this is super interesting. He calls it psychomotor therapy, and how it can lead to concrete aha moments. And he gives an example of this man who had this experience in childhood that was something he overheard with his parents, and how it just really just rocked his world, and it kind of just I think the word or the phrase is pulled the rug out from under him. And so, like, from that point forward, he was just totally dissociated with regards to understanding, you know, reality. That's what happens when you're shocked to that degree and you find something out about someone. In this case, it was his dad and his aunt. It was like it just destabilized him, right? And so it can just make you feel again like you are just wandering out in space. And so the therapy that was successful for this man is called the psychomotor therapy, I believe, and it's where it's group therapy, where people get together and they you know, focus on one person in the group at a time, and all the other people work together and fill these roles, right? Act. It's a therapeutic approach of acting, and each person is filling in the role of the people in that person's life back in their childhood days, right? And so what happens is this person gets to sort of relive these traumatic I don't think it was in specifically the moments, but he got to say his piece. He got to say what he felt and what he thought to these people, and these people were instructed by the therapist overseeing this therapy. They were instructed, the actors, to respond in a way that was validating for the purpose that the therapy was for. So, like, he was, you know, just cursing at his dad, and just, you know, just angry, and just allowing himself to get all this out verbally to, you know, the person playing the role of his dad. And the guy playing his dad was instructed to act like it really was like a blow, you know, like it just really hurt him. And that in itself was healing for this man. He got to experience it's about a big part of this, you know, with it regarding the body. There's this intimacy with our mind and our body that I don't think we give a lot of attention to, and that's the point, is that he got to re-experience this actually, right, in actual physical material reality, and this impacted him and helped to heal him in that manner. And so that's why it's called visceral, right? A visceral experience. And so it was very healing. And then they also followed that up with a scene where he got to experience what it would be like to have had his parents and these elder role models in his life be ethical and be different. And he got to see, you know, and imagine in the moment, by reliving it, so to speak, how he might have been different, how his life may have played out differently, because he would have been different. He wouldn't have been impacted. So it was just, the results were wonderful for this man, and I thought that was just really incredible. And so, yes. It's about, because he says trauma causes people to remain stuck in interpreting the present in light of an unchanging past. Yeah, definitely. So, I just thought that was incredible. I couldn't wait to share that with you all. And I hope it's been helpful. I'm already at 30 minutes. I try not to go over that. So, and again, I just encourage you to get the book if you have interest, and I'll put a link to it down in the description. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on it if you have read it, or if you have interest in any of these topics we've talked about today. I'd just love to hear your thoughts. So thanks so much for coming along to hear the message, and I hope that you have a beautiful day. I'll see you again very soon.